Colossus is the most advanced lineup optimizer in daily fantasy sports. Lock and exclude players. Adjust player exposure to reduce risk of injury or poor performance. Customize individual projections or upload your own projections. Generate hundreds of optimal lineups in seconds. Name and save the best lineups. Create winning lineups for the top sites like DraftKings and FanDuel for free at dailyfantasycafe.com.
Hello and welcome to the GPP Chin Music Podcast. I'm Big Italy 42 here talking about tonight's action on FanDuel and DraftKings. I'm going to give you an idea of some targets you can have for your tournament action. And I'm going to start off here by talking about some pitchers. And obviously your top option, Clayton Kershaw, at his price tag with a Coors Field game. I'm not saying he's an only GPP option. He's certainly very viable for cash games, as he always is. But he certainly has the biggest upside of any player on the board once again tonight. So give him a look in your tournaments. We know how tremendous Kershaw has been all season long, and he's been great consistently. Had that kind of slow start to the season, I guess, for his standards, but I mean, it's still the most dominant pitcher in all of baseball. It's a Giants team that's been struggling at the plate recently. Brandon Crawford now day to day. Maybe they miss him. One of the few guys in their lineup that actually hits lefties very well, but Kershaw on his 15.6% swing and strike rate, 33.1% strikeout rate. Definitely your top option on the slate tonight. Other options for your tournaments, Cole Hamels is an interesting one at $10,700 on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he's nice and expensive as well. This is legitimately an ace. Obviously, a guy with a significant increase in park factor for him to Petco from Texas and Arlington. So he's going to be an interesting option at 10-8 on DraftKings there. Against the San Diego team that's really been struggling recently. You got guys like Matt Kemp hitting very well right now. Justin Upton has a career of hitting lefties, but all in all, this has been a very bad offense. Derek Norris also, day-to-day for tonight, so maybe he won't play. This is a depleted lineup, certainly one that's very beatable with a guy like Cole Hamels. So I think Cole Hamels is going to be one of those guys that kind of flies under the radar. He hasn't been tremendously consistent, but when he's been good, he's been very good, including his last start. A great performance out there. So I'm looking at him tonight. He's a small favorite at San Diego, minus 135, but just a 6.5 run total. So obviously Vegas doesn't think there's going to be a whole lot going on here as far as offense. So big fan of his there. Other options I'm looking at Yordano Ventura. And while I think he's also a viable cash game option here, $7,700 on DraftKings, $85 on FanDuel. This is a guy who's been pitching very well since coming back up. Got sent down to the minors there for a little while, and he looks like he really got it figured out. I mean, his last 4 starts, he has 28, 22, 23, and 35 DraftKings points. Facing a Detroit team at Kauffman Stadium that is very home run dependent. So if these guys aren't finding the seats, they're not scoring a whole lot of runs in general. And I think he's a fair price tag for a guy who has great stuff. If he can work through the walks, I mean, that's been the biggest issue. Last time he faced this team, it was a very impressive performance. 6 innings, just 2 hits, but 6 walks. Also had 4 walks in his last start against Baltimore, sandwiched in between their 2 1-walk games. So if he can limit the walks, that's been his biggest issue recently and throughout his career, is not being able to pitch deep into games because he's been walking too many batters, getting that pitch count up. So I think if he can mitigate those issues, he's a good option for you. Aaron Nola, very interesting one as well. 6,400 on FanDuel, 73 on DraftKings. I say it all the time, targeting pitchers that are facing off against aces, especially one like Aaron Nola who's facing off against a pretty hot offense right now. Definitely going to guarantee you some low ownership. Certainly doesn't come without risk. The Mets have been hitting the ball very well. Obviously, Matt Harvey on the other side, you don't expect to get much run support. But Aaron Nola over his past 2 starts, 15 innings, 5 hits, 1 earned run, 4 walks, 12 Ks. Like I said, this is a hot Mets offense, so people will not be looking at him. They'll probably be even targeting some Mets. I'm certainly not targeting much of the offense against him, but I think he's a very viable GPP option. Same thing goes for Taijuan Walker against Houston. We know Houston, among the league leaders in strikeout rate against right-handed pitching. They strike out a ton. Taijuan Walker, a very inconsistent pitcher, but he's shown some huge upside at times. Had a complete game 11 strikeout, 1-run game against Minnesota, July 31st. Last start out, 6 1/3, just 3 hits, no earned run, 6 Ks against the White Sox. Sandwiched in between some bad efforts in there, but this is certainly a guy that has upside. We know Houston kind of raises your floor for you. A lot of times when we're looking through what these pitchers have done recently, we see tons of guys with big strikeout games against Houston. I expect that to be the case tonight. I'm not saying he's going to dominate, but if you get your quality start, 6-7 strikeouts, he's going to crush that price tag. And I think that's a fair way to go. As far as cheap guys, you can look at a guy like Kevin Gausman, but that's merely a price play and a guy that is facing a Tampa Bay offense that's struggling against right-handed pitching. So not a guy that I'm in love with, but certainly a guy I'll be considering. And then other guys you can look at, Michael Wacha against Washington. Normally, you would love this play if you weren't facing off against Max Scherzer. The interesting thing about him, though, is he's been very, very consistent, but not showing a lot of upside. And due to his price tag on DraftKings specifically, and a little bit on FanDuel as well, where he's over 9K, I just don't think he has a whole lot of upside at his price. So he's a guy you can consider, but more as an SP2 with a solid floor rather than a guy with a ton of upside here. Catcher options. You're obviously looking at the guys in Coors Fields. Both these pitchers, Chase Anderson, Jonathan Gray, very, very beatable. 11-run total. Expect lots of fireworks there. Wellington Castillo and Nick Hundley, of course. Castillo cheaper than Hundley, which kind of baffles me because he's a much, much better hitter. For me, it's easily Castillo, but you can go and pay a little bit more for Hundley there on DraftKings and maybe set yourself a smaller ownership. I don't expect ownership on either of these guys to be particularly low, but you can certainly look that way. Buster Posey against Clayton Kershaw. Obviously, we're talking GPPs here. I would never play him in a cash game here, but he does hit left-handed pitching very well. Really been getting it going recently, so if there's one bat from the Giants, I'll throw in a GPP against Kershaw. It's going to be Buster Posey. Still, you got to hate the matchup, but certainly a guy with the skills to take advantage of maybe a mistake or two that Clayton Kershaw may make tonight, because he does not make many, but Buster Posey also does not miss many mistakes. So certainly giving him a look there. Elsewhere at catcher, Jonathan Lucroy. He's got a fair price on both sites. Jeff Locke has not been a very good pitcher this year, or really ever. And he's got some nice BVP splits as well, 8 for 21 with a homer. So Jonathan Lucroy, guy that's been disappointing DFS players for quite some time, but he certainly has some upside here against a weak pitcher in Jeff Locke. Other options at catcher, if you're looking for cheaper guys, if Jared Saltalamacchia is in instead of Wellington Castillo, you could certainly look his way. I much prefer Castillo. I think I'd be playing quite a bit less of Saltalamacchia if he is. But he's also only $2,800 on DraftKings, so keep that in mind if he's in there. He's a great value play at Coors Field. Catcher not a particularly great position tonight, so as you're looking down at the bottom, there's really nobody that stands out. You like John Jaso, of course, at a cheap price tag, but he's more of a cash game play, not a whole lot of upside there. First base options. I'll give you all the guys. There's a lot of them. Paul Goldschmidt, Edwin Encarnacion, both those guys in play. Both those guys very expensive, but hard to find anyone with bigger upside than these two. Miguel Cabrera, certainly a guy you can always consider as well, but hasn't been in particularly great form over his last 5 games. Ventura's been pitching well. I would much rather, if I'm paying up, target Goldschmidt and Encarnacion. For that reason right there, you could look at Cabrera. You imagine he's going to have low ownership tonight, but then I've got some other guys for you here. Kendrys Morales is a guy I like quite a bit against Randy Wolf. I know Wolf has pitched fairly well in his first 2 starts, but obviously this is a guy on the tail end of his career, not a guy that misses a whole lot of bats, not a dominant pitcher. Pitching to contact, Royals don't strike out much, including Morales, of course, so I like him quite a bit. Seems like Hosmer is usually the play when people do play a first baseman from there. Obviously, lefty-lefty matchup, so you much prefer the switch hitting Kendrys Morales here. Ryan Zimmerman continues to hit the ball well, homered again last night, gets Michael Wacha, who is a very good pitcher against right-handed batters, not a guy I'm looking to pick on, but I don't mind throwing Ryan Zimmerman, a hot hitter, in there in a couple tournaments because he's cheap on both sides. Ben Paulson, another guy. You got to like the fact that he's a fairly cheap option, and in this matchup against Chase Anderson, you don't love Ben Paulson. I think Ben Paulson's an okay baseball player, not a guy that I like paying elite price tag for, but he makes sense as a cheaper option to get some exposure there. Mark Trumbo, this is DraftKings specific. He's only an outfielder on FanDuel, but he gets a lefty today, and this guy's been mashing 3 home runs in his last 2 games. Really, really turning it on recently. So I'm certainly not picking on Casimir, but there's 2 guys I'll be targeting him with. I think you know who the other one is. I'll get to him in a few minutes there. And then I'm going to throw out Pedro Alvarez as well. Kyle Davies, the rookie, awful in the minor leagues. Can't expect him to make much of an impression coming up into the majors today. Second base, Jose Altuve, Brian Dozier, those are your top two options. Neither one with a great matchup. Both guys with favorable ballparks, I should say. But I like both guys hitting well. Obviously, Dozier against the lefty. Rodon's been pitching well, but he's going to be a popular play today. I think Altuve's a nice swerve off that. I mentioned liking Taijuan Walker over here, but Jose Altuve's been hitting everyone. You much prefer him against a lefty, of course, but Taijuan Walker has allowed 13 homers and a 325 WOBA to righties this year, so certainly a viable option to target a guy like Altuve. Ben Zobrist, DraftKings specific, only an outfielder on FanDuel, but against Randy Wolf. Mentioned Kansas City. I love them as a stack tonight. I think that's going to be a very viable one. Neil Walker, cheap on both sides, especially on FanDuel. Once again, picking on Davies, hitting from the left side of the plate. That's where you want to be targeting him from more often than not. There's not a whole lot of other guys that really stand out. A guy that has power, but really hasn't connected on one in quite a while. It's been 9 games since he's homered. Luis Valbuena against Taijuan Walker. You can look at him, the lefty-righty split. But I think my favorite cheaper option on FanDuel or on DraftKings, not so cheap on FanDuel, Rugi Odor is fairly priced. Ian Kennedy has struggled with lefties. He's been very good recently, but Odor, I think, has a ton of upside, especially because he should be batting down order. Should keep his ownership levels really low for tonight. Third base options, of course, Josh Donaldson is going to be a less than popular play, especially on FanDuel, where he is way more expensive than everyone else. But Trevor Bauer, a very hittable pitcher. Donaldson, been arguably the best hitter in baseball this season. So you can get yourself some shares. I know I certainly will be with some of these cheaper pitchers. Miguel Sano and Nolan Arenado. I think Arenado is easily going to be your chalk play, and rightfully so. A couple huge games in a row. Gets Chase Anderson tonight at Coors Field. Sano, a nice swerve off of Arenado. The guy's been just destroying the ball recently. 3 for 5 last night. Hit another home run. Gotta love Sano as a nice pivot off the top options. And then as you're looking down a little bit more, Yasmani Tomas on DraftKings. Play him at 4K. Has not been good, but he's a Coors bat, so you like him. Manny Machado, Erasmo Ramirez had that stretch where he was solid for a while. That's been horrible recently, so I'm giving him a look as well. Adrian Beltre against Kennedy. He's a guy who's been hitting the ball well in the second half, so I'll give him a look as well. And then looking down for some cheaper options, not a lot that really stands out. Jed Lowry is a guy who's been hitting well. He gets Taijuan Walker. I don't think that's a bad way to go if you are going to semi-punt the position. I'm not paying all the way down. I really don't like the upside with any of these guys here at their base, all the way at the bottom. Shortstop, Troy Tulowitzki is fairly priced on both sides, but he has been a constant disappointment recently. Maybe that's going to keep his ownership levels low once again, especially in a less than ideal matchup against Trevor Bauer, who I mentioned is exploitable, but not a guy you're going out of your way to pick on with everyone. So I like him. Of course, you like Carlos Correa. I think Jose Reyes is going to be an option as well, but this is a very top-heavy shortstop position tonight. So if you're going to be paying up, I don't think any of these guys are going to be particularly low-owned. The guy that I'll probably be looking at more than these guys as a swerve is Jung Ho Kang. He homered again last night. The guy is having a hell of a season. He's expensive, not quite as expensive as these top guys, going up against a rookie pitcher. So if you want to swerve, that's my swerve off those guys. Below that, Asdrubal Cabrera. He continues to just hit the ball well since the All-Star break, and he's fairly priced on both sites. He's a guy that'll be very low owned, I would imagine, tonight. So give him a look as well. Cheap guys. I love myself some Marwin Gonzalez usually, but against a righty, not as big of a fan here tonight. I think I'll be moving on past these cheap shortstops because not a lot of power there, and I'm trying to chase power in my tournaments. John Segura, the other guy I'll mention. I think he's viable in cash games, though, as well, especially on FanDuel. Outfield options. I don't have to tell you about the outfielders from the Coors Field game. A.J. Pollock is the top option. He's also priced like it. So I'm going to be getting quite a bit of him. Where I can. David Peralta, where you can't fit Pollock in, I think makes a lot of sense. He's a fair price tag on both sides as well. Ender Inciarte seems a little overpriced to me, but I think that he is a viable option. Chasing upside in the outfield, obviously your Colorado bats, Blackmon, Gonzalez more so with the upside. And then I like Ryan Braun is in a great spot against lefty and lock. He's under $5,000 on both sides, only $43 on FanDuel. Great price for him. Lorenzo Cain gets a lefty at Wolf, who has just been awful. I'm loving targeting him here as well. And then as we scroll down a little bit further, you get yourself some other interesting options. Ben Zobrist, who I mentioned at second base on DraftKings. I like Gerardo Parra, who should be batting in the top 3 of the order at $4,100 against Erasmo Ramirez, who I mentioned has really struggled recently. So I think that is a great option. Avisail Garcia, is a guy who has been hitting lefties well. Gets Tommy Malone here. He homered again last night. He's much cheaper on FanDuel, almost $4,000 on DraftKings, which I certainly don't like, but he should be a low-owned guy. Chris Davis, baby crush, I should say. Chris with a K for the Brewers. We've seen this from him over the past couple weeks. It's home run or bust. More often than not, it's bust, but he certainly has big-time upside against a weak pitcher in Jeff Locke, so I'll be giving him a look in many of my tournaments. I already mentioned Trumbo. Of course, the other guy that I was alluding to earlier, Nelson Cruz. Fair price tag on both sites. He hasn't hit a homer in, looks like 6 games now. Scott Kazmir has been a very good pitcher, but certainly whenever he's facing a lefty, he will get some GPP love from me. And then other guys to consider in your outfield, not a whole lot that really stands out as far as great plays. I love Andre Ethier. He's a cash game and a GPP play. I imagine he'll be pretty popular, though, so you're really not sneaking up on anybody. Max Scherzer has had some issues with fly balls, hasn't pitched particularly well. I'm looking at Brandon Moss as my sneakiest GPP play of the night. Batted 8th yesterday, but homered. Had a home run and a double. This is a guy who has home runs in 3 of his last 6 games. We know he has a ton of power against righties. Scherzer has not looked himself recently, so certainly not going out of my way to pick on him, but that's a guy that I'll be considering in my tournaments as well. And that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DFCafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.